it's just giving yourself permission to not be in the best, but doing everything you can to be your best. Mental health, it's giving yourself that permission to be okay with not being okay, and then having a plan to deal with the days where you're not okay. The components of my password to sign on to my computer is reminding myself that I'm fit, I'm trained, and I'm ready. And it's the One Warrior's Creed.
So why is it got to be so damn tough?
Welcome to the Toughness Podcast. My name is Paddy Steinfort, your host, and today we have a crack team of two people I look at and I can't imagine doing their jobs. First up, we have Sergeant Lane Douglas Hunt, who has served as a police officer for more than a decade so far, mostly on the front lines in patrol, including as part of the emergency response team, an explosives technician, detective in the Special Victims Unit, and critical incident stress management team. Welcome to the show, Lane.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to meet you. And it's nice to see you again, Brian.
Yeah, also on the show here, we have Brian Willis, who served as a full-time police officer for 25 years and is now president and CEO of Winning Mind Training, promoting excellence in training and leadership development, and specifically working with critical incident teams, police, and other high-stakes environment. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks, Paddy. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you both. And as I read through those pre-show notes there, as I'm describing and introducing each of you, I'm like, when I first read these, as I was getting set for the call, I was struck by, if this was a Hollywood script, we've basically got like 5 characters in one there, just reading through all of the roles that each of you have played. And I'm sure if it was a Hollywood script and they said that was one person, I'd be like, come on, that's not real. But apparently it is. Lane, amazing to talk to people like yourself and like you, Brian. You're calling in from Vancouver, Canada right now, is that right?
Victoria on Vancouver Island. Yeah.
Okay. And that is, I say to people, that is, for me, one of the most beautiful parts of the world for about 2 months of the year. I'm from Australia, so the snow and the cold doesn't really do it for me. But in the middle of summer, I've been there, thanks to my work with the Toronto Blue Jays, I've been to BC during the middle of summer, and oh my God, what a beautiful part of the world. It reminds me of my first visit to Canada, which was up there to get a visa to start working over here. And I was just like, Canadians are known internationally as the more friendly version of Americans, right? And so I'm up there in this beautiful place and I'm getting a visa and I'm with the more friendly version of Americans. And I was like, how good is it here? But then it turns out that even in friendly BC, I got myself into a situation just walking from my hotel to 7-Eleven, I think it was, that I was a little bit confronted by some disagreements and a bit of a scuffle, and then police rolled in. And it just goes to show that even with the friendly people, it's not always safe and sound and happy days, sunshine and rainbows. And so that leads me to my first question, Lane. Even though Canada is a nice place and BC is heaven on earth at times, you do a job that takes you to the darker, shadier areas and the more scary parts of that. Why did you choose to go into doing what you do?
Policing, I knew I wanted to be a cop pretty early on. I decided when I was 18. And, I found it was just a profession that really aligned with the values that I was raised on, which is, helping people. And it's probably one of the more ultimate team sports that I've ever encountered. I grew up playing team sports. I was big into basketball, and policing is one of those dynamic, just incredible teams where you rely on your partner and your colleagues to go through sometimes life and death situations. So it called to the kind of adrenaline junkie in me and that side of me that wants to help people and challenge myself. It's like you mentioned, there's 5 characters in one. Well, it's a job where I get to do a number of different roles and it's never boring. So it called to a lot of different aspects of my personality and it fits me well. So
never boring is a good way to describe what I imagine. If I lined up all the police movies and TV shows, like you basically live all of those in any given day. And so I'm sure it's never boring. You also use the words there, help people. And that's a key part of a lot of the guests on this show who do serve either in first responder roles or in the military, that their calling is one of helping others, not just necessarily getting their own fix of adrenaline. And Brian, I'm curious that obviously you served for a long time yourself as a police officer, but now you've gone into working and helping train other police officers. Is that really the part of that evolution for you of helping people, but now you're helping the people who help the people.
Absolutely. And to me, it's when I started, and I'm like Lane in that I always wanted to be a police officer, but I took a bit of a deviation when I was a teenager and ended up quitting school and being homeless and living out of the backseat of a 1964 Plymouth for 4 months, and eventually got back on track and was able to start that career. And when I started, I wanted to be a tactical officer, SWAT officer. And I had that opportunity to do that a little bit leading up to and during the 1988 Winter Olympics. So just to put this in time frame, I mean, I started in 1979, so 41 and a half years ago. But for me, what became what turned into a calling is when I got into training. And I was unhappy with some of the things we were doing in training. I had suffered a pretty significant knee injury that resulted in reconstructive surgery, which kind of shifted me out of patrol sergeant role into an administrative role. And then I got involved in delivering the training. And that for me is when it really became a calling and a true passion around finding ways to continue to prepare people for the challenges that they're going to face in their career and in their lives. And what can we do over the long haul to set people up for success? Set the human beings in the profession that are doing a very difficult job in very complex and chaotic environments. And what can we do to set them up for success over the long haul, physically, mentally, emotionally? And so that's been kind of my path for the last 30 years, as I've been involved in training for 31 years now and on a full-time basis for well over 2 decades. So yes, that for me has become helping the helpers to be better at what they do and to thrive not only in their careers, but in their lives and then post-career, because we don't live very long generally after we retire. So we need to change a lot of those things. So.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing to hear you describe that, and particularly to say you started in 1979. I started life in 1979. So it really puts it in perspective here. I'm going to be soaking up a lot of knowledge. I also love the fact that we've got here, this is the reason why I invited you both on the show, was we have a frontline operator right now, and also someone who coaches, so who has explored how do you actually teach that? Because that's really relevant to the people who are listening. We can talk all we want about the stories of frontline, and we will, but it's about, okay, well, how do we actually get better at preparing for that? And I'm really looking forward to digging into that nuance. And so one of the questions that we ask of every guest who comes on the program, and I'm interested in hearing from each of you, both at the operator facing the fire level, but also as someone who has to teach that. I'll ask you first, Lane, what does toughness mean to you in your experience as an operator in some of the most intense situations that humans can imagine?
It's funny. My definition of toughness has changed over my 13-year career. When you're a rookie and you start at the police academy, your idea, and certainly in that time, when the culture was a little bit different, it was, how much can I withstand while keeping my mouth shut and putting one foot in front of the other and just continuing on. And that is something that I did and I practiced until I had a really bad day at work, and that didn't work for me anymore. That's actually how I met Brian. So I would say now, after 13 years of being a magnet and having lots of experience in kind of tough situations, I look at it as the ability, in considering kind of the 3 pillars of resiliency, which I would consider, physical, mental, and emotional. I look at it as the ability to bend and not break. And for me, that's, it's an ongoing evolution and a journey, and something that requires attention to each of those 3 pillars and a practice. So for me, my answer has really changed over the years, and that's where I am in my journey right now. It's training myself to bend and not break.
That's an awesome definition that I've heard many times over the last few years, and likewise my evolution. And I've seen other people go through that transition from it's just hanging on and gritting your teeth and being stronger for longer, to actually being able to be adjusted and to being able to adjust and be flexible when that's necessary to survive or to perform or execute. And you mentioned a couple of things there. One was practice, which we would definitely want to get to by the end of the show, is what does that actually look like in practice? How do you actually develop that skill? And number 2 was you had a bad day at work. I definitely want to put a pin in that. We're going to come back to it because I want to hear about that bad day. But Brian, before we go there, to you now and your definition of toughness, having served for longer than been involved in the police force, either as an operator or a trainer for as long as I've been alive. I'm very interested to hear how you define toughness in that context.
And I think early in my career, I'm like Lane, is I would have had a very similar definition early. What I've come to figure out over the last number of years, and for the last 20 years, I've been teaching a concept called this question, what's important now, which I got from Lou Holtz, and I refer to it as life's most powerful question. And I believe now that toughness is the ability of people to focus on what's important now in training and preparation, in performance in the moment, and in then the post-event and recovery afterwards. So, for example, what's important now might be that, if my alarm goes off at 3 a.m. and I start a 12-hour shift at 6 a.m, if I'm committed to getting up and getting my workout in, then what's important now is to get out of bed, get my butt out of bed, get my workout in, and then get to work and go work that 12-hour shift. What's important now at the end of that shift is to come up with a ritual to shift roles out of cop mode when I come home back into husband and father mode. What's important now is to be protective, super protective of my sleep and focus on the nutrition. And what's important now after the event, and Lane can speak to this as well, is that we've started to understand the importance of looking after our people in advance, but also after the event. That when I started, and certainly probably even when Lane started, the mentality was suck it up, soldier on, big boy, big girls, don't cry. If you're something bothering you, you're weak. And if you're weak, get out. And so now what we realize is that what's important now is that if something's bothering you, get the help you need. What's important now is it's okay to be okay. And what's important now is it's okay not to be okay, and get the help that you need. So for me, that toughness piece is the ability to focus on what's important now in the training and preparation phase, the performance phase, and then the post-event recovery phase, whether that's post-shift or post-event like Lane was involved in, but to really have the ability to focus on those elements.
That really cool phrase, which I've seen on the bottom of your emails and on your website, is that question about how to win is what's important now. And that's whether it's winning getting up in the morning, as you said, winning at practice, or winning in those critical crucible moments where they can be, in your situations, the difference between life and death. Or for some of the people I work with, the difference between your next contract being $100 million or $0. And these are critical moments, but being able to focus on what's important right now is a key skill. Now, you describe it really well as what's important now, but I'm curious, before we jump to that story from Lane of the bad day at work, what happens when you're in a moment where there's multiple important things? Like, what's important now, obviously, is a flexible concept, but it actually sets us up at times to be like, well, what's important now? Yeah, I need to get up, and I need to answer that email, and I need to make sure I run, but I also need to make sure that I'm ready to do my presentation. Like, there's a lot of things that are important. How do you handle that within the context of that what's important now framework?
Well, the reality is if we have competing resources, then if we ask the question, what's important now, there's only one of those that's going to come to the front. So what's important now is I need to get my workout in. That will allow me to get my mind focused. That will allow me then, when I do my presentation for the talk that I need to give, it will allow me to be in the moment and prepare for that, rather than be thinking about, man, I should have got my workout in because now I'm going to get behind. And so, as Lane used the word practice, if I have made this my practice to be continually asking this question 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 times every day, then the answer is going to be clear. Now, what's important now might be that instead of spending 2 hours in my workout, that I cut it down to 45 minutes so that I have time to do some of those other things.
Right.
But my experience is that this will bring tremendous clarity to sort through the multiple choices that we face.
Yeah, it's a conversation I often have with people who are trying to start a meditation practice or a mindfulness practice, where it's, I can do this mental work, but I also have a lot of stuff to do. But when we remember the second, third order, fourth order ripple effects of doing this work, it often can help it become more of a priority rather than just, oh, I don't have time today. And maybe that'll be part of the practice discussion later on in the show. But for now, we've had a couple of teasers of this bad day at work, and now we're totally focused on the main story here, Lane, not to put too much pressure on you. But can you describe what that experience was for the people at home who are sitting here? They might be driving to work. they're sitting on their couch, like they're just chilling out in the normal world with no stress. And you're about to tell us one of the most stressful experiences of your life, I suspect.
For sure. So a bit of backstory. When I first got on and I went to police academy, I decided really early on that I wanted to be a member of the tactical unit, which is it's Canadian SWAT. So I was training from day one for the eventual tryout announcement of ERT. And I was obsessed with this. I was someone who I got hired when I was 21 and I trained incessantly for this tryout. Hadn't announced a tryout yet, but it was, I knew whenever they announced it and I was eligible, I was going to compete. And at that point, there had never been a female to make the SWAT team. So it was something that I had put a lot of pressure on myself to be ready for. So when you get hired, the whole world is your oyster. You're rolling around with your partner and you're having the time of your life. You're not kind of jaded by years of job stress, and you're excited and you're young and you're getting after it and taking calls and just learning. And
is it the buddy cop that we see on the TV shows and the movies? It's like you're rolling around with your partner. It's just fun and jokes and like fixing things and saving lives.
100%. It is. You have that innocence almost where you're just, everything is great. So I actually had a partner that was also training for ERT. And so, we were trying to take all the big calls and we were just having the time of our lives. So 2.5 years into my career, I found out early on that I was a bit of a magnet. I, had a number of calls that were like, close ones, but challenged me. And I rose to the challenge and it instilled in me that I was on the right career path. So the reason I'm telling you that backstory is because 2.5 years in, on a Monday morning, 9 a.m., January 17th, 2011, I'm 2.5 years into my training and I'm in peak physical shape. Like I am ready. If they announce the tryout tomorrow, I'm ready for that tryout. So I was in good physical condition and just ready for anything. So Monday morning, January 17th, I am working by myself. And I get dispatched to a one-man call, which is kind of the less exciting calls. My partner had something else to do that day. So I'm like, can I, enough time on the job where I roll my eyes a little bit at being dispatched to a theft of a chocolate bar. Literally, it's a chocolate bar. And at the 7-Eleven. And so downtown Douglas Street, super busy Monday morning. Everyone's hustling and bustling, getting their coffees, going to work. And this call comes in. So I go. And I meet the store clerk. He takes me to the back and is working on the surveillance for me. I'm gonna investigate this shoplifter to the best of my abilities. And I leave his office and I go towards. It had this big double glass door, and I leave the door, and this man is walking towards me, and I assume, like the 1,000 other times in my life where someone's walking towards me or I'm holding a door, that they want to enter the store. And he approaches me and I have one hand up on the door. I'm holding the door open for him and I'm smiling at him. And I say, "There you go, sir." He looks at me kind of like a puppy dog does when they're trying to understand what you're saying, and tilts his head and says, "Actually, no." And that was my only hint that something was off. And before I know it, he reaches behind his back and does this huge telegraphing motion towards my head. And he's got a knife and he stabs me in the neck. I put my hands up to block the knife and the fight is on. He stabs me. It went through my ear and right onto my carotid artery. Fortunately, it went through my hand before it went into my neck. And he tells me he's going to kill me, and he is trying to kill me, and I believe him. So fight's on. I managed to hip toss him to the ground. We go to the ground. He lands on his back. Again, I was in peak physical condition at that time, but I certainly got very lucky with how we landed on the ground. I ended up getting full mount on him. His wrists hit the pavement and bounced off the sidewalk, and that allowed me to grab both of his wrists and pin them to the ground. I know he stabbed me one more time on the way down in the neck. I could feel it, but I had this huge wave of adrenaline that came over me. So I've pinned him to the ground and I need to go for my gun. This man's trying to kill me. I haven't been able to create distance at this point to go for my gun. Initially, had I dropped my hands down to get my gun, I'd be dead because the my hands wouldn't have taken that initial blow to my neck. So I'm on top of him and I'm willing myself to let go of him to go for my gun again. I look at the place on his face where I want to shoot him and I steel myself to release his hand to go for my gun again. When I do this, he throws the hand that I've just released over my back and tries to fish the knife to the hand that I've just released. And so, my gun was useless to me that day. It may as well have been in my locker still. So I just start hitting him as hard as I can. I go into this just blind tunnel. They talk about tunnel vision. I had it just locked on him and am hitting him as hard as I can. And it's not until I hear a woman's voice telling me to stop and that I'm hurting him that I'm kind of taken out of this kind of rage of trying to defeat him. At that point, I realized that there's people around me. Like I said, it's downtown on the main strip of downtown Victoria. And I realized there's friendly people around me and that the knife was no longer in his hand and that he had been effectively neutralized. And I go to put him in handcuffs and I realized that I'd broken this hand and I was bleeding pretty badly. And then I go to use my other hand and I realized that this hand was I had just skin and meat and I could see my skeleton of my thumb, which was weird because I was not feeling any pain. I could not feel it at all. And they say that pain lets you know that you're alive. And well, at that point, I knew I'd been stabbed in the neck twice and I'm not feeling any pain. So that was a pretty scary realization that it was just shocking to see that and to not be feeling it. So I had actually gotten a 1033 code out, which is the officer in trouble code, and I could hear sirens coming, which was an amazing. I talked earlier about that team dynamic, and when you hear your friends coming to help you, it's one of the best feelings in the world. So I hear the sirens coming. I know that this guy is not going to get away with doing this to me, and help is coming. So
I know, having talked to some other people who've gone through similar experiences in episodes, that at that point you realize, okay, this isn't going to go on forever and I am going to survive. And there's obviously a response to that in the moment. But firstly, I just want to thank you for sharing this because I've watched you as you've shared that so far. I know the journey's not over. And that's obviously a traumatic experience, even just to recount, let alone to have gone through. And so I really appreciate you sharing that with us right now and with the listeners who can't see the physical tenseness in your body as you tell that story. As I said, so I've given you a chance to take a breath there as well. Mm-hmm. As I said, once you recognize that this trauma is about to finish, the intense acute trauma, but the trauma isn't finished yet, as evidenced by the fact that you're still talking about it and it still affects you today. Talk to us a little more about what, and I assume this is where you and Brian start to cross paths, is what happens as part of what they call in the mission critical community, the residue of this incident, the thing that stays with you, even though it's finished and he's subdued and taken into custody.
It's funny because 10 years later, it is still, I'm sweating right now. It's a hard story to recount. And one of the reasons is because, so when help arrived and I still wasn't feeling any pain, there was a moment where I started to black out and I thought that I was dying. And it was the thought of being 24 years old and someone have to go to my house and tell my mom that I had died in the line of duty was just, that feeling is something I'll never be able to rid my body of. And in that moment when I was blacking out. I had like the little black dots in the corner of my eyes and I was going unconscious. And that's what I thought. I was feeling my neck to see how bad the wounds were. And all I was getting back was the meat and blood from my hands. And so I thought I had this huge gaping hole in my neck. And so my friend Shannon arrived on scene and pulled me into the ambulance. I don't remember how I got in the ambulance, and she starts ripping off my clothes and just telling me like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And I remember kind of just coming to and thinking like she was kind of patronizing me and just giving me the old like, hang in there, kid. But she said to me like, no, it's your hands. Like your neck is actually, it's fairly superficial. Like you're going to be okay. I'm not finding any other stuff. And she's ripping off my clothes and all my kit. And she's like, it's just your hands. And I remember I felt really sick all of a sudden and I puked. I hit the back of the ambulance with just this wave of vomit. Sorry if people are eating their breakfast right now, but I remember when all that adrenaline basically came out into puke form. I remember feeling all the pain. My hands hurt, my neck hurt, everything hurt. And I just remember feeling so happy that I was
Feeling.
alive. Yes, that I was feeling my body, and I believed her that I was going to be okay. So that's like, to answer your question, that was, I was going to be physically okay. The journey that I went on post that moment, where, of course, this is a big story. This is not something that happens very often. Cop gets ambushed holding the door open for someone and not even related to that person, why I was there, and stabbed in the neck. Like, it's a big story. So the attention and
So this wasn't the thief who stopped the bar. This is a random person attacking a police officer in
random. Yep. It was a man who just wanted to kill a cop that day, and he happened to pick me. I had never met him before, just someone who hated the police. So it was pretty shocking, which is part of the feelings afterwards. It's just it's shocking. So I was at that point still a 24-year-old female trying to do something that females had never done before, get on this team. And there was a bit of a narrative out there that females shouldn't be allowed out on their own as police officers. I was waiting for surgery. I severed 2 tendons in my hand, and I was in the hospital the next morning. And the people in the cubicle next to me were whispering about that. Can you believe they let female officers out on their own? Like, it's crazy. And I couldn't tell my story because there was going to be a trial. So it was on video, and I obviously had a statement of what happened, and I couldn't share that. So people couldn't see the video, and that, I did in fact handle myself in that moment and did what I needed to do to go home at the end of the day. But people were fixated on this, why are females out there on their own? Like, that's super dangerous. So I set out to prove that I just, wanted to be tough, and I wanted to prove that narrative wrong, and without being able to tell my story and without people being able to watch the video. So I did everything I could to come back physically. I drove my hand therapist nuts. I said, you know what? There's going to be an Ear 2 tryout, and I'm going to be there. So get me ready. I'll do push-ups on my elbows. I relearned how to shoot with a different grip. I learned how to grab a pull-up bar with a different grip, a barbell. I just was hell-bent on getting back physically. And I was able to do that. I won an international fitness competition in New York. Months later, I became the first girl on SWAT. I did a bunch of competitions. I won those, and I was just out there proving that girls could do amazing things. But that was hiding what was really going on. And that was when I was going home, I was having insane nightmares where I would end up in my kitchen and have no idea how I got there. I had to clear my bedside table of all the furniture because I would wake up fighting, and I broke both my lamps on my side tables, and I would wake up just covered in sweat. I couldn't cut food with a knife. I went back to work after 2 months. I would go to these calls, knife calls, weapon calls. I'd hold doors open for people. But as I'm holding doors open for people, I'm thinking, how am I going to kill them before they kill me? Which is a very weird way to think, because I hold doors open for people all the time. And it was unpleasant the way that I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's adaptive. Like, that's a reasonable thought if you've been in the position you've just described. I don't know if there's many humans who wouldn't start thinking that way.
But it felt crazy. And it felt like my mind was running away from me, and I had post-traumatic stress disorder, but I was hiding it because I was embarrassed. And we didn't have a culture even 10 years ago where it was safe to talk about and to admit that we were struggling. And so I did all this in complete silence. I didn't tell anyone. I checked all the boxes to get back to work, and I got back to work immediately.
And so what was the turning point for you then? Because we could make an entire season out of SVU out of this, but we're not going to. We have only got an hour here, or a little more. We will extend based on how amazing this conversation is. But how do you get to a point where you recognize that this isn't healthy, or that something has to change, and that you decide to bend instead of pushing through it?
So I didn't. I crashed hard. That's how I met Brian. Brian, so about a year or so after the incident, Brian came to Victoria and did a class. And so I was in this class, and I was with 30 of my peers from other agencies, and Brian played a radio broadcast of a police officer who'd been shot in the face. This radio broadcast triggered everything. So up to this point, I've been able to deal with the symptoms of my PTSD by myself. I've been able to hide them. I was trapped in this classroom with 30 of my peers, and I was at the back, and I had a complete panic attack. My heart started racing. I was crying. I had a complete emotional breakdown in front of all these people. So now I've essentially been exposed. And I think I scared poor Brian. Well, I didn't, because he's a stud, and this is, something he recognized as a reaction to a traumatic, a trigger essentially. This radio broadcast was brutal to listen to for anyone in the room. It was a really raw broadcast of an officer in a life or death situation. And so
for those who we'll put a link at the bottom of the show if we can find that, just to really flesh it out a little bit for listeners who are that keen on being disturbed. Keep going.
So I just had this complete emotional reaction to this broadcast. And so ultimately it exposed me as not being okay. And my coworkers recognized this, because it was beyond a normal reaction. And so that night I was told, you made people nervous today. You're clearly not okay. You need to go to a doctor and get a diagnosis. And so I was now being told I wasn't allowed to go back to work.
So you had to?
I had to. Yeah, because my job was everything to me at that time. I didn't have any balance in my life. I was obsessed with work, with trying out for the team, with being on the team. And so I was forced to go to the doctor. The doctor immediately diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was in a pool of pity after that. And then Brian actually reached out to me after that and offered me a lifeline. He threw me a life preserver, and I took it. And he invited me to Calgary, where I got to listen to some incredible speakers, Jared Reston and Bob Delaney. And that is what started me on the journey of giving myself permission to be, mentally injured and to put the work in to get back. And I did. And now I'm living my best life with PTSD, and it's totally okay. So it's Brian. It's all Brian.
That's awesome. And Brian, I'll jump to you in a second, but what you've just described there, again, I'm going to thank you, because that's a really tough thing to just recount, not just the acute incident, but everything you had to go through afterwards to get to the point that you are now living your best life. And it really reinforces that dichotomy of two different ideas or mental models of toughness. One being you push through a feeling until it goes away, which sometimes works, until it doesn't. Because some things won't go away, and we're not going to be able to feel good all the time. This might be a 2-hour thing, and you can't feel good for this next performance. Just get it done. So cool. And there are other things where you're like, I might carry this for the next 10 years plus. And if that's going to be the case, what do I need to adjust in my approach in order to be able to still live my best life? As you just said, I'm living my best life with PTSD. Really great description, and again, so grateful that you've shared it. Brian, to you now who spotted it, as Lane described her little breakdown, not so little breakdown, when you see someone like that reacting during one of your sessions or around you, given what you've seen and experienced yourself as an officer, but now giving training, this is a really interesting question that I didn't think I'd be able to ask, but it's really pertinent to ask, because a lot of the listeners who tune in, there are some who are going to be going through their own stuff. There are some who are wanting to learn how they can handle stuff better. There are others who are just curious cats, and they just like hearing amazing stories like Lane just shared. But some of us will be in contact with another person. We'll have someone close to us who we see some of these things in. We know our friend or our partner or our teammate needs help, needs support. But because of some of the prejudices and the biases that Lane's described, it's hard to even have that conversation. How do you reach out to, you did it to a stranger, but tell us how you went about doing that to Lane to make it okay for her to begin her journey to recovery, and how you might suggest people do that to people they do have a relationship with, where they can support them, but people don't even know how to start that conversation.
It's an interesting thing. I think part of it is just acknowledging that whatever you're feeling is perfectly normal. Whatever you're feeling is okay. I have a lot of officers that'll come up to me after presentations and say, well, I was experiencing this, or I'm feeling this, and is that normal? And my answer is always yes. So if you're feeling it, it's normal for you. and it's different for everybody. And so I think the key is just to, first of all, let the person know that you're not there to solve their problem, that you're there for them, and that it's okay what you're experiencing. It's okay. It's completely natural. And we might think at the time that it's an unnatural response, but it's completely natural. And what's happened, and the challenge for in public safety, for law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, is that it wasn't just that event. So, that was a big event in Lane's life, but Lane had been a police officer for, she said, about 2.5 years. So it's 2.5 years of secondary traumatic stress. So it's 2.5 years of being exposed to other people's pain, suffering, and trauma, going to the fatal traffic crashes, dealing with the child abuse victims, dealing with the rape victims, telling families that a loved one has been killed in a car crash, murdered. And so what officers are dealing with is they're constantly exposed to other people's pain, suffering, and trauma. And if we don't make it okay to get the help we need on a regular basis, to talk to somebody, to access or utilize peer support, and Lane's very involved in peer support now, then what officers are going to do, or other people in any profession, we see this in nurses, we see this in doctors, we see it in paramedics, firefighters, military, law enforcement, is they're just going to keep stuffing it down, stuffing it down, stuffing it down. So if you think about, if you've ever watched shows on hoarders, or if police officers have been in hoarders' houses, that's what we are. We're hoarders of emotional trauma. At home, we take the garbage out all the time so it doesn't build up. But at work, we stuff it down, stuff it down, stuff it down. And now we get a major event like Lane was thrust into. And now on top of that, you have people that are saying crap like women shouldn't be cops, or women shouldn't be out there on their own, or whatever. My take on it is, when that individual went out that day with the design, the goal to kill a cop, is he made a massive mistake by picking Lane. There's a lot of cops he could have picked that he would have prevailed in that violent encounter, and they would have been going to an officer's funeral. But he flat out picked the wrong cop, because he picked somebody that he made the mistake of looking at this young female officer and thinking this will be easy. And he was not aware of all of the training and all of the preparation, mental, physical, and training and preparation that she'd put in to prepare for an event. And that's what allowed her to prevail in the event. And then what we have learned in the intervening years is that we need to make sure that we look after people afterwards, and that we have culturally sensitive professionals that we can send them to. Because I've talked to officers who said, you know what, I went and met with this psychologist because it was mandated by my department, and the psychologist had a breakdown here in my story. So that doesn't do anything for an officer when the mental health professional you're dealing with has a breakdown.
It's an important point there that I think the listeners should recognize and be okay with, is that while we're talking here about talking to someone, letting it out, getting support, going to share some of the trauma and work through it, it's not necessarily always with a psychologist. Whilst getting professional help is definitely recommended for some severe things, at first, it could just be peer support, because in some ways, for some of these events that are not normal and that are incredibly traumatic, that are very hard to understand for people who haven't been there before, it's often better to be shared with another colleague who's actually seen it, dealt with it, seen someone else fail at handling it, so we can talk with knowledge as opposed to just raw, wow, that happened? That's pretty full on. And so really important to stress that just because we're saying seeking help, it doesn't mean you have to go to see a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I'm not saying not to do that, because that's absolutely beneficial. But sometimes the first step is just talking to someone who knows what it's like.
Absolutely. And I think Lane mentioned listening to Bob Delaney speak. So Bob, back in the 70s, went deep undercover, infiltrated the mafia in New York and New Jersey, lived that life for 3 years, came out, spent another 10 years in the troopers dealing with the court cases, and then went on to have a very successful career, spent 25 years as an NBA referee, basically hiding out in the open. But one of the things Bob talks about is the importance of peer-to-peer counseling, talking to somebody else. Now, here's one of the challenges for law enforcement, is that Elaine mentioned that she's told you're not allowed to talk to anybody about this because of the pending court case. So in some jurisdictions, like I was in Florida 2 weeks ago doing leadership training, and in Florida, their peer support people have the same level of those conversations. So if I'm talking to as if she was a psychiatrist for a psychologist. But that's not the same everywhere. In some places, peer support are concerned that they could get called in to testify as to what the officer told them. So it's a balance. So Lane needs to be able to talk to me about what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, help to normalize that process without doing the normal cop thing and wanting to find out exactly what happened and getting into the details of the event. So it can be a difficult challenge, and it's an additional challenge for law enforcement professionals. It can take up to 2 years. Let's say Lane had shot that individual and he died of those injuries. It can take years for an officer to get told that you're not going to get prosecuted for murder for shooting that individual. So in that entire time, this is hanging over them. They're told you can't talk to anybody, and they're concerned about, am I going to be prosecuted or charged with murder? So there's a whole bunch of different elements here that in a lot of cases are unique to the law enforcement profession.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing people can do is just say, okay, this is what I've noticed. What do you need? What can I do to help? Are you all right? And then to avoid trying to solve Lane's problem. Probably what Lane needs is for me to just listen a lot, and then to let her know that, you know what, it's okay to feel that way. It's completely natural and normal for you after what you've experienced to experience what you're experiencing now.
Yeah.
So understand that what you're having is a very human response to something that is not part of most people's human experience. Trauma is a normal part of the law enforcement experience, to experience trauma and other people's trauma, but it's not a normal part of the human experience. And so we have these expectations that law enforcement officers can do superhuman things, but they're human beings doing a very challenging job. So we just need to keep that human piece in mind all the time.
Great point there. And I think that I might reword it slightly in saying that trauma is not a regular part of the human experience, but many humans experience some form of trauma along the way, probably not to the extent that Lane's described there. But our ability to process adverse emotional and psychological events is a great predictor of whether we're going to have an enjoyable, fulfilling life, but also B, just whether we can be there for the other people who are around us who may be going through something that we've already dealt with. And I think that was an element there that you mentioned of, as you described some of that, Brian, I was struck by the fact that it reminded me of many times as a performance coach, I might be sitting with someone who's telling me about what they're dealing with, whether it's they can't concentrate, whether it's their wife has left them and they still have to go out and perform tonight, whether it's the coach has told me I'm not coming back next year, whatever it might be. These are significant interrupters of their mental and emotional experience. And that we might talk for an hour and they do the emotional vomit. It's not the physical vomit that Lane described before, but they vomit up their feelings. And at the end of it, I'm like, okay, well, I feel like, okay, I've got to do something here. I've got to help them. But really the best thing they could do is just get it out and put it on the table. And then they go back to work. We're a little cleaner, a little lighter, and a little more able to focus on the now, a little more able to tune into what's important now, as opposed to what's sitting in the back of my brain and it won't let me be here. So sometimes just talking and not trying to fix things is at least a good first step. The second step, though, which brings us all full circle back to one of the things you said earlier, Lane, was finding a practice, developing ways of coping that are not counterproductive or not avoidant, but they're actually like, here's a way I either process things or I learn to saddle up and I carry that, but I carry it effectively and competently and with compassion for myself, but also presence in the situation. And so I'm curious to pick up where we left off, where you've spoken to Brian, you've started getting help and you're working through now to, as you described, living your best life. What's one or two of the key practices that you have employed to help you be able to still go out? Because I imagine you've still gone out, as I described your resume earlier, you've still gone out into some badass situations since then and obviously performed with aplomb. So how have you managed to do that? What practices have helped you face those same stressful situations and not implode again?
In the last few years, I've really incorporated mindfulness into my regular routine. I believe it's as important to work on your mental health as it is to work on your physical health. And physical health is something that I was good at. It's, it's easy because you just do it. But mental health, it's giving yourself that permission to be okay with not being okay, and then having a plan to deal with the days where you're not okay. And so I've adopted a practice that it's actually, I read a book called Stress Less, Accomplish More by Emily Fletcher. And I really like her methodology because it's not an hour of meditation. You know, cops are busy. We usually have a million things on the go. You're trying to be a good family member. You're doing a job that is long hours, and you want to be physically fit. So you're spending time training, and then you should have a balance. So, I mean, we're busy people, and the idea of meditating for an hour is just not realistic. So I really like Emily Fletcher's practice, the Ziva technique, because it incorporates mindfulness, meditation, and manifestation, which is visualizing and kind of picturing scenarios or your goals, and in your mind going through watching them unfold the way that you want to see them unfold. So every morning I sit with my dog, and it's actually supposed to take 15 minutes, but I've whittled it down to 7 minutes. And I honor where I'm at today. What am I feeling and what am I stressed about? And mindfulness is the practice of just being present in that thought, in that moment. And is this something that I need to put more time into, or is this something that is a stress, but it's okay, and I'm allowed to feel stressed because this is something that's stressful? And then practicing gratitude. So injecting that kind of positive thinking into your life, even if you wake up and you have the most stressful day imaginable, still taking that time to inject that positivity by practicing gratitude. It's something I do every morning, and it has done wonders for me. It's such a simple thing, but it is simple and it works. It's effective. And it has allowed me to continue doing a very stressful job. Post that incident, so I did sex crimes for 5 years, and terrible files that were very stressful. And it's like Brian said, you're dealing with victims, and it's the stress of other people that they put on you, and you want to do a good job. And being an explosive tech, like there's some pretty stressful moments in the explosive world, and I'm able to do all these things because I allow myself that time to be present in what I'm feeling and give myself permission to feel all those things. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really struck by how well you broke down those three different elements of a mindfulness or a mental practice, really, which is, I would describe them as things, same as a basketball practice. Let's use that as an example. Same as things that you do before or after a game, not in the game, right? I practice the day before a game. I shoot around before the game. I recover after the game. And you've really mentioned three things there. One, mindfulness, which is just being able to tune into what's happening for you at that moment, like be present. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And not judging it or reacting. Number two, being able to operationally prepare for, I'm picturing what might happen and what I want to happen, and not necessarily how I feel and all the fantastic things around it, but what will I be doing? What are the steps? What are the processes? And three, the gratitude thing, which is kind of like filling up your bucket. Like that is a recovery process that allows you to build and maintain energy and create a bit of a buffer for some of the more stressful times. These three are great practices. You also then mentioned, though, something about the ability to recognize when I'm not having a good day, which mindfulness is great at developing that awareness. So I can tune in and check that, like, as I'm entering this building and I know there's a criminal somewhere in the back of the warehouse, I'm using one of the movie scenes that I can imagine right now, right? That I know that I'm not actually in the best state. I'm either really tired, I didn't sleep well, I had a fight with my partner, my boss told me I was getting a pay cut, like whatever it is. I'm not fully present and not trying to fix things or feel 100% because we can't. It's too late. I'm in the building and the criminal's over there and we have to go. What are your best tricks or techniques or the thing you found most effective for yourself when you do notice that you don't have your A game? You've come with your B or maybe even your C game, and there's not much you can do to fix that right now. Having some of these long shifts is probably an example. Like, I am really tired. I'm running on empty. I'm stressed. There's X, Y, and Z happening. What do you do to adjust to that? How do you make sure you can perform even when you only have your B game with you?
You know, it's funny. There's just simple little tricks that I tell myself to get myself mentally ready to enter that building. And it's one of the tricks that I have is I actually have one of the components of my password to sign on to my computer is reminding myself that I'm fit, I'm trained, and I'm ready. And it's the One Warrior's Creed. And for some reason, it doesn't matter if I've not slept. It doesn't matter if I got crappy news from my boss or I didn't do well on the last call. it's reminding myself that at the end of the day, I have trained thousands of hours to be here, and my B game is probably still going to be good enough. And I've reminded myself before I start every shift, because I can't get onto my computer unless I remind myself I'm fit, I'm trained, and I'm ready, and I'm here to do this. So it's not every day is an A game, but that is okay because it's going to be enough. And on days where maybe it isn't enough because those stresses have gotten me to the point where I'm not confident that it's enough, maybe that's a day that I need to say, look, I shouldn't be here today. And I think it's also giving yourself permission to maybe, if you haven't slept for 2 days and you're not capable and competent, stepping into that building and saving a life or saving your partner's life or dealing with what's in front of you, maybe that's a day you need to take a time out and address that. So I think it's just giving yourself permission to not be in the best, but doing everything you can to be your best. So.
Yeah. It's a great, without putting too much of a psychologist's hat on, the concept of acceptance and commitment is really what you've just described there. Like, yeah, I'm not good, but I'm committed to doing this. And I know that it's probably going to be okay, and not stressing out about not being on your A game. Brian, have you got anything to add to that question? I'm sure you get asked that a lot in your seminars when we're trying to lead from the front, when we are trying to perform in these environments that are hostile, chaotic, unpredictable. What's the best way when we enter there, regardless of whether we do have our A, B, or C game, explain to someone that you did it, or you would describe, here's the best that I've heard and the best approach that I can recommend?
Well, I'm going to go back to what's important now. And what's important now is that you prepare in advance for these events. Is the time to prepare mentally and physically for that event is, as you well know, is not at the time. So this is why the practice becomes so important. What's important now on the way to that call is to, if I'm finding myself getting jacked up, is there's things like breathing that I can do. I can run through that checklist, or with my partner, we can have that conversation. Okay, so we're going to this. What's your job? What are you thinking about? What decisions might you have to make? What are you worried about? What could go wrong? So that we can use some of those questions to prepare ourselves in advance, so that we've thought about what could go wrong. We've had this conversation. I might do that by myself, or I might do it with my partner while we're going there, so that when we get there and we're going into this to clear this warehouse, or we're going into an active killer event, or we're going into whatever the situation is, we've already got some clarity, and we're focused on what's important now. So if I focus on what's important now, I can set that other stuff aside, or I can ruminate about, man, this is a really shitty time. I'm really tired. The Sarge was chewing my ass out. And so that's why that question, I think, is so powerful, that if we get into the habit, the practice of that question, then we can use it on the way. I think the other thing from a preparation standpoint is to understand that we can take the power of little things. You read 10 minutes a day of a nonfiction book. You do that every day. You're going to read 10 or 12 nonfiction books a year. You train 10 minutes a day, 4 days a week, 48 weeks out of the year. That's 32 hours extra training a year. If you do it 5 days a week, that's 40 hours of extra training a year. I don't have to do 2 hours in my workout. If I can do an intense workout in 20 minutes, we have this tendency to want to make big things out of it. And when we can chunk it down and chunk the event down, I think that's helpful. But I go back to what's important now and have people have that conversation and that thought on the way. And what it does is it sets the other stuff aside and allows me to focus on what's important in this particular moment at this particular call.
It's a common refrain for coaches of experts, which you obviously are, is the ability to direct your attention. That's really what good coaching is, what good teaching is, and really what good or expert operators do, is they put their attention on the most tangible and valuable things in any given moment. And so that's, rather than thinking about your emotions, we talk a lot, I'll mention a lot, and people who listen to the show will have heard me say this before, the game doesn't give a shit how you feel. The criminal doesn't give a shit how you feel. That whatever obstacle that you're facing right now doesn't care about your feelings, so you don't need to either in that moment. Not saying we don't talk about it at some time, but in that moment, paying attention to how you feel is distracting, to say the least.
And I've heard you talk about this concept that attention is the currency of performance. And I think what's the important thing is for people like yourself that are high performance coaches is to teach, say, an athlete what to pay attention to. So we can tell an officer you need to have situational awareness, but what does that mean? if they do not know what to attend to, if I do not know where to put my attention, then my attention is going to be bouncing all over the place or focused on the wrong things. Because as Professor Paul Taylor will say, is people will pay attention to what's important to them in the moment. And in hindsight bias, we often criticize, well, you should have been paying attention to this. But a lot of times we tell people the importance of attention, but I think what great coaches like yourself do is they teach them what to pay attention to. And that becomes critical. So that, that's what vision coaches in baseball do. They teach a batter what to pay attention to. They teach a fielder what to pay attention to, because you can't pay attention to everything. Yeah. So I think that's part of the coaching piece is we need to understand the importance of attention, but then help them to understand what to attend to help them prepare for that.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that applies just as well to whether it's an explosives tech or someone who's investigating sex crime or any of the things, the crazy human experiences that you've had, Lane, that a lot of becoming an expert or even competent at that is pattern recognition. Being able to notice that I've seen this before or I've seen something similar to this and this is how it might break. Is that fair to say that you getting better is really just about getting better at recognizing patterns and what to take into account and what not to?
For sure. And something that I also like doing is part of that manifestation piece is I train crappy situations before they happen. I like to think about what ifs, and something that my partner and I used to do riding around together is, okay, right now there's a bank robbery. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? What weapons do we have and what would we use? And if he comes out this way, what would be our backdrop and how are we going to approach this? So I'm a huge believer in visualization and preparing myself for as many crappy scenarios as possible before they happen.
Wow.
And I've found that to be super effective. And when I get to a bad situation, I've already kind of put myself in this position without having been in it before.
I'm saying wow because it absolutely mirrors what experts in other areas do. I shouldn't be surprised. But there's a fantastic fable, probably true story, but Michael Phelps tells it himself, so it is true, that he visualized every single thing that could go wrong for one of his races. And it happened to be the last race where he won the Olympic record number of medals. One of the scenarios he imagined was, what if my goggles break and they fill up with water? This happened in the final, and he managed to get through it because he had prepared. He didn't panic. He didn't overexert. And I've seen this happen as well, sitting with coaching staffs. I was just talking with an NBA coach yesterday who I spent a number of years with. And the amount of times we would finish a meeting with, okay, 30 seconds on the clock, one timeout left, opposition ball, underneath, out of bounds. What are we going to do? What's the priorities? What are they trying to do? And it would happen almost every meeting. And at first I'm like, oh, here we go again. Like, these are just basketball nerds who love talking about it, which is true to an extent. But then we saw it actually happen in game 4 of a playoff series. And I was like, oh, wow, that's super valuable, right? So really cool to hear you recount that.
Huge value. Yeah, definitely. It's funny because those things have happened, and if you can visualize to the point where you're actually raising your heart rate and you're kind of your palms are getting sweaty, that's the goal is get that training when you're not in that moment. And so it makes that moment a little easier. So it's hugely effective and something I'll do for the rest of my career for sure.
And Patty, if I can just build on that, because that's something that I've been teaching in law enforcement for 20 some years. And as you said, that's the power of imagining. And it's not just imagining all rainbows and roses, it's imagining what could possibly happen. Imagining when I get shot, then what am I going to do? How am I going to respond to that? How am I going to stay focused, stay in the fight, win the fight? And I mean, another friend of mine who got shot 5 times at contact range, including the first round right in the face. I mean, one of the things that Marcus says is, I had listened to officers tell their story, officers that had been shot, stayed focused, stayed in the fight, won the fight. And on numerous occasions, I'd imagine myself getting shot and then going home to my wife, Stephanie, and my children, Jeremy and Haley. And so he said that night when I got shot, it wasn't that big a shock to me. In my mind, I'd been there, done that, won that fight before, and allowed me to stay calmer and fix problems. And I mean, he sustained some pretty significant injuries. His humerus in his one arm was shattered, running his dominant arm basically useless in the aftermath. His left hand was ripped wide open. He had taken a round in the fight. But that's exactly what you're talking about, the power of that imagery piece that we need to pay more attention to as a profession.
Yeah, and really important nuance there is that, Lane, I've got to admit, when you first raised it as part of your practice, I was like, oh no, this is someone who manifests all the positive rainbow stuff. But no, but
Not rainbows.
no, but the key is that when we're talking about this stuff, it is really important to, like, it's nice. It feels good to imagine winning the trophy or getting the promotion or, not getting shot and handcuffing the person and getting all the accolades. That's great. But in reality, the people who deal with these situations are much more likely by nature to have almost done case studies in advance of, like, hypotheticals. If this happens, then what? But it also allows us to do some form of emotional regulation in advance, like you said, Lane. And if you are good at imagining that stuff, it can be disturbing and it doesn't feel nice, which is why a lot of people will avoid it. But it is actually protective in advance, because the next time it happens, you kind of reckon, oh yeah, I know I'm going to feel this, or like, I've felt this, but if I do X, the feelings won't matter. They won't get in the way. So really cool. I didn't expect us to go there, but we did, and really grateful that we did. I don't want to bring an end to the episode, but I'm going to have to. It's been an amazing discussion. I'm curious for each of you who have clearly dealt with things that most of us can't imagine as listeners, and you continue to both put yourself out there, Lane, and also Brian, devote your life to helping others who are in those situations. What are your goals for the next phase of your career? Lane, what do you see for the one who dealt with that incredible incident in yourself and then went on to still become the first female SWAT member in Canada and clearly a leader in your industry? What's next?
I just recently was promoted to sergeant, and it's something that I am so excited about because it puts me in a position where I get to share some of my experiences, and it gives me even more credibility to share that with the next generation. I still love the job, getting out there on the streets and wearing the uniform and interacting with the public. And I'm still an explosives tech and a firearms instructor, and I have my hand in still a lot of fun things, but I definitely am moving towards a phase in my career where I want to mentor other people to aspire to do these neat things that are, maybe outside the box, for not specifically for women, but just for, you can do anything. Sounds cheesy, but I like to be that example and to share that with other people. I'm also really passionate about creating this culture where if you have an occupational stress injury or a mental health injury, it doesn't mean you're a broken toy. You can still go on and do amazing things and have a very fulfilling career. And so my goal right now is to work on creating that culture where peer-to-peer support and talking about mental health we're creating a safe place to do that. Getting away from, you're a broken toy if you have a mental health injury. I have PTSD. I deal with triggers every day, but I'm not a broken toy. I have been very blessed. I've had a really exciting career, and because I've owned my diagnosis and I'm doing the things I need to take care of myself. But that's my next chapter, is pushing the envelope on that.
Very cool. I love the term occupational stress injury, because even the term, like, people ask me about mental health semi-regularly, and it's a term that, whilst it's well-meaning, kind of is taken in the wrong way, because when we're actually saying mental health, often we're not referring to health or the healthy end of the spectrum, right? But to talk about it as an occupational stress injury that comes with the territory in some instances is a really cool reframe. I love that. I'm going to steal it. I will quote you on it though. Thank you. Brian, how about you? What are you hoping to achieve? Obviously, you described a little bit about your purpose and in an earlier description of what you do now for a job, but what are you hoping that this does for the industry at large and maybe even outside of the industry?
I guess my hope would be twofold. One, for the industry, is that we embrace this concept of what's important now. And what's important now is to build a culture of leading, of learning, of inclusion, of belonging, where we see training and learning as something that's from pre-hire to retire, and see it as an investment rather than an expense, and continue to invest in the training and the health and well-being of our people, and create cultures where people will step up and lead on a regular basis, where we create cultures of inclusion and belonging. And from the other side, my hope is that people in the public will take time to understand the human side of law enforcement, that law enforcement is a very challenging, complex, dynamic profession where officers who are human beings are thrust in, and sometimes, a lot of times the majority of times they do a very good job, but sometimes they're going to make mistakes. And most of the time we make mistakes because we're doing the best we can with the tools we have in very complex and dynamic situations. It's interesting when people watch sports. So people watch baseball. Nobody expects a batter who's in a regular rotation to bat 1,000 for the season. People have no expectation for the pitcher getting paid $25 million a year to throw a perfect game every game. Most pitchers will never throw one in their lives. Very few people will win a Golden Glove. And so, error is part of sport and people accept that, but people are very critical of those in our profession when they do something human and make an error. So my hope is that people will take the time to make that connection. And part of that is on us as the profession, but that people will learn to see that these are human beings doing a very difficult, very challenging job, and they're doing the best they can in very complex situations. So I guess I've got those two hopes.
Two great hopes to put out there at the end of the show. And it makes me think, the first one in particular makes me think of the theory of human capital. For those who aren't familiar, it was put forward by an economist as an argument for education and learning as a standard part of what we do, both in the workplace and beyond, because it refers to the qualities and abilities that are kind of intangible, but make humans productive, and that it's actually been shown to not only increase production, so we're better performers, but it increases individuals' incomes and that person's ability to improve their own lives and the lives of those around them. So really important concept that is actually, I share that with you, Brian. It's one of the core reasons behind this podcast and why it's gone from being an internal project for the US Army to being shared with the world, is because hopefully we can touch this on, even if one person hearing Lane's story today and the developments that came from it, even if that prompts someone else to grow and get better, then it's been worth it. So appreciate you both being on here. For anyone who wants to follow up and find either of you, Lane, where does someone track you down on the interweb? Or do you try and stay not track downable because of your job?
Yeah, I stay a little bit not track downable. I mean, certainly I'm a police officer, so I have a public, you can contact me at Victoria Police. You can find me through contacting them. But yeah, I try to keep a bit of a smaller online profile.
Nice. And very noble of you to do that. Brian, yourself, you're out of the service now, so you can promote yourself as much as you want.
Yeah, I guess I really have three places there. So my main website is winningmindtraining.com. And so the programs and the courses that I offer there, I have a website called Life's Most Powerful Question, which focuses on what's important now. And there's a weekly blog post with that. So those are probably the best ways for people to find out more about me or reach out to me.
Great stuff. And I want to thank you both again, Lane in particular, for sharing your experience. It's such a powerful story, and you're an incredible example of toughness in action for you to have gone on to bigger and better things after what you shared with us. So thank you so much for coming on, and also for your service, for the way you help people day to day, and Brian, for the way you help the people who help the people. We really appreciate coming on, and good luck in the future.
Thank you so much, Patty. Great to meet you.
Thanks, Patty. I appreciate the opportunity.